On this Monday night, promise and potential progress in the pursuit of a COVID-19 vaccine.
It's not the final news, but it's great news.
The early results raising some hope of a shot at immunity. Mounting resistance to more restrictions.
We have to have a happy balance.
Ontario's dilemma over how to crush the curve as airlines struggle to fill flights. Why one carrier is banking on a new route between Toronto and a small BC city. And the supporters who hope President Trump triumphs.
Trump train, baby, Trump train.
The fans who are adamant he is going to make America great again.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. After 8 months of COVID-19 and a second wave rising as winter approaches, it is easy to get discouraged. And while there's no end in sight to the pandemic, there is a glimmer of good news about something that could get us on a path out of the gloom. Drug maker AstraZeneca says the COVID-19 vaccine being developed at the University of Oxford, which is in the late stages of clinical trials, has had positive results in older people. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is one of 11 that has reached phase 3 clinical trials in a field of 50 potential vaccines being worked on in 32 countries. Never before have so many scientists around the world been focused on this single thing. A breakthrough is not guaranteed, but in our top story tonight, Eric Sorensen explains why the Oxford vaccine appears to be the frontrunner.
It is a potentially massive breakthrough. The vaccine being developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University produces a robust immune response similar in both older and younger adults. The elderly have a weaker immune system and are much more likely to get severely ill from COVID-19. In Canada, close to 90% of deaths have happened to people over the age of 70. A vaccine that can protect the most vulnerable would be a game changer.
It's not the final news, but it's great news. Older people, as we all know, are far more vulnerable to COVID-19, and those are the ones that need the protection. So they are showing a robust immune response and even a little bit of weaker, lesser side effects.
The AstraZeneca vaccine triggers a twin response, one that protects and one that attacks. It makes protective antibodies that bind to the virus and neutralize it so it cannot infect a healthy cell. Where the virus does infect a cell, T cells can be activated to identify the infected cell, kill that cell, and with it, the virus.
T cells are what help our antibodies kind of become more efficient. They don't act individually, they act in concert together.
The AstraZeneca trials were halted temporarily after one volunteer became sick, but restarted when the illness was not deemed to have come from the vaccine. Canada has committed more than $1 billion for 170 million doses from several companies, including Moderna and Pfizer, and that includes 20 million doses from AstraZeneca. Canada began a review of the AstraZeneca vaccine earlier this month.
It's better to have a number of options on the table rather than saying we're stuck with this option that only works in this segment.
Experts say the widespread use of vaccines probably won't happen before spring of next year, as trials determine whether they will work, will last, and will be safe.
We really have to be prepared because if things go really well, this could be on us within months, and boy, do we want to see an end to this.
Vaccine distribution will be a huge challenge worldwide, but it's an exciting prospect, bringing the pandemic under control, reopening the economy once and for all, and getting life back to normal. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
We are far from normal now, and as frustrating as it is, the only way to reduce the spread of COVID-19 now is to reduce the number of people we come into contact with. That message was repeated by politicians and public health experts again today because numbers in Canada keep rising in multiple places. More than 2,500 new cases were reported across the country today. In Manitoba, Premier Brian Pallister says people who have been ignoring the rules and spreading the virus need to get with the program.
When you have symptoms, don't go to church. When you have symptoms, don't go out to the bar. When you're waiting for a test result back, for heaven's sakes, don't have a house party. Grow up and stop going out there and giving people COVID.
In Saskatchewan today, 54 new cases were reported. Alberta continues to see a spike. More than 500 new cases reported there today, and there were more than 200 in BC. 2 more positive cases in Yukon. Cases are creeping up in the Atlantic bubble. 5 new ones reported there. In Quebec, there were more than 800 new cases today. Restrictions in red zones have been extended to the end of November, and Ontario had more than 850 new cases today. Tight restrictions are in place in several regions in Ontario, including Toronto, and officials have warned that could be expanded to the Halton and Durham regions, but no decision has been made yet. Premier Doug Ford says he is trying to strike a balance between saving lives and keeping businesses afloat.
We have to protect people, and we have to protect their livelihoods. And the best way we can protect our economy is protecting people and keeping this virus contained.
Political leaders across the country and around the world are struggling with that balance, how to keep infection rates down and the economy open. As Mike Drolet reports, it has led to lots of frustration.
Was it COVID-19 fatigue or frayed nerves? A 22-year-old was shot and killed in Toronto on Sunday after an argument in a liquor store over physical distancing. Regionally, political leaders say they're tired of having to adapt to COVID-19 as well. The mayors of regions just outside Toronto sent Premier Doug Ford strongly worded letters. In essence, don't shut us down again.
We want to have just a little more autonomy as our individual regions dictate. So you can't take a cookie-cutter approach to this particular situation.
At his daily press conference, he made it clear he hears it all.
There's always been pushback on all sides.
But that doesn't make it easier to come up with a plan. Ford has been reluctant to declare another lockdown, preferring instead to go with targeted shutdowns, which haven't been popular with the businesses affected.
We have to have a happy balance, and it's not easy to make sure that on one hand we keep businesses going, and I just want to give people hope.
And perhaps shockingly, the hope is in the current numbers. While there's no denying the steep climb in cases in September, epidemiologists look at the 7-day averages for a clearer picture of the province's health. And October's data does show what could be the start of a plateau.
If you bring in nothing, you get in serious trouble. And that's what we've seen in a number of American states and what's happening in Europe right now. But Ontario's measures are kind of middle of the road. And we've seen middle of the road measures be able to decrease things elsewhere. So I'm cautiously optimistic.
But that doesn't ease the stress on businesses desperate to reopen, or kids in the hot zones where Halloween has been canceled. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
New restrictions are coming to Canada's western provinces after a spike in cases over the weekend. BC is now limiting household gatherings to immediate family members and 6 close contacts. And Alberta is putting in new restrictions in Edmonton and Calgary.
We have now crossed a tipping point and are losing the balance we have been seeking.
There is now a mandatory 15-person limit on all social gatherings in Edmonton and Calgary, including dinner parties, receptions, and other social events. The change will not impact structured events like dining out, worship, and wedding and funeral services. Hundreds of healthcare workers and support staff walked off the job at several hospitals in Edmonton and Calgary and other municipalities today. They're angry about the province's plan to cut 11,000 jobs, mostly by outsourcing the work to private companies, and accuse the province of being reckless and provocative during the pandemic. The province was already struggling to keep up with scheduled surgeries and increased hospitalizations because of COVID-19. Alberta Health Services calls today's walkout illegal. It says it affects all of its facilities and says it puts patients at risk. Non-urgent ambulatory care procedures and clinic visits were postponed. In Ottawa, opposition parties voted in favor of a Conservative motion to investigate the government's handling of the pandemic. They want answers on how much money has been spent and on what. It's not a confidence vote, so there's no risk it will bring down the government. But as Mike Couture reports, it will keep up the pressure on the Prime Minister.
I am seriously saying that our contracts, vaccine, PPE, and rapid test kits are in jeopardy.
That warning from the procurement minister came just hours before a vote for a proposed parliamentary probe of pandemic spending. Anita Anand says disclosing details of the deals the government has brokered with certain companies will put a chill on future negotiations and put Canadians at risk.
Our relationships with suppliers will not only be negatively impacted, they may also disappear.
Last week, the president of Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters wrote a letter to the minister expressing concern over confidential business information being disclosed in the public. In a statement to Global News, vaccine maker Pfizer said it worries the release of commercially sensitive information could be damaging.
It's just asking some basic questions.
The conservative health critic says her motion is about government accountability of pandemic spending, not revealing commercial sensitivities, which would be reviewed first by the parliamentary law clerk.
It basically means that there's a special person whose job it is to make sure that this type of sensitive information is not released unduly.
But what about that claim that businesses would walk away from negotiations with Canada if certain information was published? This expert on government-business relations says you have to balance transparency and privacy concerns.
The privileged information that we might have shared with government in order to get that procurement contract going, how do we know that it's not going to get in the hands of the public?
Well, transparency will be just as important when the government presents a budget update this fall. But in a virtual discussion with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that update will not contain a fiscal anchor. Donna?
Okay, Mike Lagature in Ottawa, thanks. Voters in Saskatchewan are choosing who will steer that province through the rest of the pandemic. This is Premier Scott Moe's first election since taking over the leadership of the Saskatchewan Party from Brad Wall. Moe is hoping for a fourth consecutive term for the party. A record number of votes were cast during advance polls in Saskatchewan. And the first federal by-elections to take place in the pandemic are happening today in 2 Toronto ridings. Voters will choose who they want to replace former Finance Minister Bill Morneau and Liberal MP Michael Levitt, who resigned. The ridings of Toronto Centre and York Centre are both longtime Liberal strongholds. Well-known broadcaster Marcy Ian is running for the Liberals in Toronto Centre. The new leader of the Federal Green Party, Annamie Paul, is running there too. In York Centre, community activist Yara Sachs is hoping to retain the seat for the Liberals. Maxime Bernier is also running there. The leader of the People's Party lost his seat in Quebec in the last federal election. And in the U.S., there is 1 week left for President Donald Trump and his rival, Joe Biden, to win over voters. More than 60 million Americans have already made up their minds and cast ballots either by mail or by voting in person. That is unprecedented. And so is the pandemic, of course. COVID-19 case numbers are rising in 44 states. The rolling average of daily new cases is higher than it's ever been, nearly 70,000. More than 40,000 Americans were hospitalized with COVID-19 yesterday. That's the 5th day in a row the number has been that high. And more than 225,000 Americans are known to have died from COVID-19. Yet, as Jackson Prosco reports, President Trump's campaign strategy seems to be the pandemic is no big deal.
With every ICU in El Paso, Texas now full, health officials have activated field hospitals and issued fresh stay-at-home orders and a nightly curfew.
The reasons for the new order have to do with that we're at a crisis stage.
Cases are on the rise in almost every single state. COVID. On the campaign trail, President Donald Trump is trying to sell a different reality as he gathers thousands of supporters at tightly packed rallies.
We're rounding the turn. All they want to talk about is COVID. By the way, on November 4th, you won't be hearing so much about it.
Monday, Trump tweeted, "Cases up because we test, a fake news media conspiracy."
We not only lack a national strategy, we actually have a commander-in-chief and his entire administration who are actively trying to work against some of the most clear kind of ways to contain this virus.
There is more defiance at the White House, where 5 aides to Vice President Mike Pence have tested positive.
We're not going to control the pandemic. We are going to control the fact that we get vaccines, therapeutics, and other mitigation.
Why aren't we going to get control of the pandemic?
Because it is a contagious virus, just like the flu.
The way he's handling COVID is just absolutely, totally irresponsible.
For Joe Biden, the pandemic and the loss of at least 225,000 American lives form a closing argument about the need for a change in leadership.
He's gone round the bend. We are in real trouble.
That's still a tough sell for a large number of Americans. While 82% of Biden supporters see the coronavirus as a very important issue in the election, just 24% of Trump supporters feel the same way. With no strategy, there seems to be no changing the trajectory of the pandemic. At current rates of infection, the U.S. is on track to record nearly 500,000 new cases between now and Election Day. Donna?
Jackson Prosco in Washington, thank you. A new itinerary for Swoop coming up, how the discount carrier is hoping for a rebound in passengers. The Finnish airline Finnair is trying to find a unique way to adapt. It is selling business class meals at the supermarket. The food, which includes teriyaki beef and smoked Arctic char, has become an instant hit. 1,600 meals were sold within days of hitting store shelves. Not an airplane in sight. Abbotsford isn't exactly the cosmopolitan capital of British Columbia, but now a low-cost carrier is counting on Canadians traveling between Toronto and Vancouver to use that suburban city as a landing pad. As Robin Gill reports, the airline is hoping the new route will have Canadians swooping up deals and travel within Canada.
Swoop Airlines' first flight between Toronto and Abbotsford, BC may not be jam-packed, but at $99 each way, the ultra-low-cost carrier is hoping to lure Canadians eager to vacation at home.
We're positioning, and even this new route we're starting today is about the recovery. We're positioning Swoop for the rebound that we know will come, but frankly isn't here yet.
Border restrictions are in place, so that's stopping Ontarians from crossing into Buffalo, New York to use cheap carriers like JetBlue. And British Columbians aren't heading to Bellingham, Washington to take advantage of Allegiant Air's low-cost flights. So smaller airports in Canada, like Abbotsford, could potentially capitalize.
Last year, $42 million left the country on travel spend, and this year, if we can get some of that travel spend back, even just a small part of it, that will be a huge difference to the Canadian economy.
Destination Canada, a federal agency that monitors tourism in this country, has been looking at travel habits on the internet. The research shows we are searching for places to go domestically, with an eye on BC and Ontario, because those provinces don't have a 14-day quarantine when traveling interprovincially.
Maybe it's a bit of a roll of the dice to see if that actually does play out.
This tourism marketing expert says no quarantines and low fares are just pieces of the puzzle to increase demand.
Just because someone went on the internet and planned a dream vacation or thought it would be nice to go to Toronto, I don't know that we can be certain that that's going to happen.
Still, the price was right for these passengers.
The price I just paid was the lowest price I've paid in probably the last 20 years coming to British Columbia.
I got a round trip and it was about $400 for two.
For Swoop, it's counting on travel to take off again after it cut capacity by 95% at the beginning of the pandemic, and knows it isn't the only airline in turbulent times. Robin Gill, Global News, Abbotsford, BC.
Still ahead, a nation celebrates why Chile's constitution is back in the hands of the people. Look at this show of defiance in Belarus. After 11 weeks of constant protests today, there was a nationwide strike. Supporters of the opposition are keeping up the pressure on Alexander Lukashenko to step down as president. Protesters threatened to paralyze the country if he did not relinquish power by midnight, a deadline he ignored. People have been taking to the streets since he claimed victory in an August poll widely viewed as rigged. Human rights groups say more than 150 people were arrested today. And in Chile, they are celebrating. People there voted overwhelmingly to tear up the old constitution and write a new one. 78% of people supported scrapping Chile's old constitution imposed 4 decades ago by military general Augusto Pinochet. The referendum was called after the government hiked rail fares last year, sparking protests that flared into a movement against the country's high cost of living.
We got to do everything we can to make sure this guy gets elected.
Up next, why his devoted followers are still backing President Trump. As November 3rd approaches, the U.S. is so polarized it's sometimes not easy to even have a civilized conversation with voters about who they think should be the next president of the United States. President Trump likes to say no one has more devoted supporters than he does. Our Mike Armstrong went to a Trump rally in Pennsylvania to ask supporters why their man deserves 4 more years.
Go, baby!
T-R-U-M-P! Trump, Trump, Trump!
They are nothing if not passionate. Donald Trump, coming to Lancaster, pulled thousands out to the airport.
It's not the nicest day, but you wanted to be here. How come?
Support President Trump. Make sure he gets reelected.
my honest desire to see my president. I can't wait to be right here in our own hometown, see Air Force One fly in. I mean, it's just a spectacle. 2020, baby!
It felt a little like a rock concert, complete with vendors hawking T-shirts and hats.
Trump train, baby, Trump train.
And a crowd ready to hear the greatest hits.
I'm happy to be here. It's my second rally, and pray to God he wins.
Now, it may have been a tumultuous 4 years with Donald Trump in the White House. No one in this crowd seemed to dispute that. But they will argue that Trump fulfilled his MAGA promise, that he did what he could to make America great again.
In a lot of ways, yes. I mean, I'm a business owner. Yeah. My business was doing much better before this whole COVID started than before.
Pennsylvania's governor has been very critical of the Trump campaign holding events in this state and disregarding public health guidance. He's called it dangerous and manipulative. There were masks at this rally, but there was very little physical distancing. There also seemed to be very little fear of COVID-19.
You can't shut down the state. You can't shut down the country. You got to keep America open. You got to keep businesses open.
You're killing people more so by shutting down.
The one thing about Trump's support is that it's been rock solid. He may not have expanded his base or even tried much, but the people in his camp aren't interested in leaving. Trump, we were told over and over, was put in power by someone.
God. By God Almighty.
Yep. And he's not finished yet.
4 more years.
That passion is one thing Trump has going for him. His supporters are eager to vote. There is a confidence in this crowd that even behind in the polls, Trump can still pull this out. Pollsters, they say, didn't predict he'd win 4 years ago either. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
And that is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the moon. NASA has confirmed signs of water have been found on the moon. It's not a pool of water, but molecular water, and it was discovered on the sunlit surface, which opens the possibility larger deposits may exist all over the lunar surface, not just in the cold, shadowed places, which may not have seen a single ray of sunlight for potentially billions of years. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.